Welcome to the Kyperian Commentary Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Davis. And joining me today, I have Pastor Bill Smith of Cornerstone Reformed Church in Carbondale, Illinois. Bill, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, so it's been a year since last time you were on the podcast here. And at that time, we were talking about being part of the cult of Reformed evangelical churches.
Right.
And I think
Right.
we're still a cult, but according
Yeah.
to CNN, we are now also an arch conservative church network. So, how do you
And
feel being an arch conservative now?
I feel pretty good about it. I don't mind the label at all. Usually I don't like labels too much because they pigeonhole you, but I really do like that label, arch conservative. So very comfortable with that.
We've got to find a way to work it into our acronym as a denomination.
That's that's right.
Well,
Uh,
Bill, as you know, the reason I wanted to have you on, you wrote an article for the Kyperian Commentary website recently about trauma and biblical counseling. And I thought such a timely topic to talk about. You held up sort of two extremes in your article. Trauma
right.
is everything and trauma is nothing. So I want to get into that a little bit and talk about it. But first, let me just ask you a general question. What prompted you to write this article? Was there a particular thing you saw, situation, or just general cultural drift that you saw that made you want to write?
Uh, well, I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah, recently, I think I mentioned this in the article. I'd seen some people. I'm not going to name names about people on X, and um, just with some kind of hardline biblical counseling things. Trauma, basically, trauma is nothing, and you just need to forgive and forget and move on type thing. And then, of course, the trauma uh, the trauma syndrome is in the air. And we have people who, every time they get their feelings hurt, they're traumatized. Um, just like I think we were talking just before the recording came on. Everything is abuse, that kind of thing. And so that with some things I've gone through, not only personally but pastorally, and dealing with counseling situations over the past 35 years, it is sometimes difficult to discern. Where on the spectrum is this? Is this legitimate? Is it not legitimate? But also wanting to take some things seriously. There are in and I would say just a general type thing. And what I wrote was very introductory. It's not the answer, the end all be all. I mean, as I said in the article, it would take books really to flesh all this stuff out. But what I've seen, what I've experienced in pastoral ministry and counseling, is that there are people who just kind of have this one size fits all for every type of incident that happens in your life in some biblical counseling situations. And they say, whether or not somebody just stole $5 or sexually abused you over and over as a child, well, you just have to forgive. Well, that's true. Surface level, that is absolutely true. But what I've seen is that it doesn't take the consequences of those actions seriously enough to understand, okay, what kind of healing needs to take place in the person who has been sinned against. And that is kind of what started this, because and sorry for the use of the word, but what the triggering mechanism on social media was simply the fact that you just need to repent of your bad feelings and move
Mhm.
on. And sometimes that's true. Somebody says an uncharacteristic, rash or harsh word, and you respond or you react, and you say, well, that was unkind. Yeah, you probably just need to get over that and keep moving on. But that's very different than characteristic and continual physical, emotional, sexual abuse through the years. And so it's just that saying, okay, some of these things are a little more complex. And sometimes I think we want to just have simple answers. And the trauma type people, uh, like, and if you ever get to interview Bo Cogbill, you just need to bring up The Body Keeps the Score and watch him go apoplectic. He hates that book, and I
Yeah.
understand. I understand why. But one of the things I saw when I read that book, Richard Bledsoe, long time ago, years ago, mentioned that book, and I finally just went through it. And there's, of course, a ton in there I don't agree with. But one of the things I saw is that, okay, some of these guys are taking the fact that these incidents affect the body in some way, some shape, some form, some fashion, so that just to, for instance, it trains our fight or flight response to certain
Right.
things. And well, that affects your adrenal glands. That affects a number of your endocrine system in your body. So your body is being programmed. It's not just we're not just a a brain that's disconnected from all the other systems of our body. Everything that we think, everything that we do affects our body. You know, we have psychosomatic problems, and so that understanding that and saying, okay, well, you know, those eye exercises that Van der Kolk gives, that you know, a lot of that stuff is just silly.
Mhm.
And he's just a symptom relief type guy. He doesn't think there's really
Right.
any redemption. You're hardwired to this for the rest of your life, and you're always going to be this victim. This is defines you now, and you're just going to have to, you know, take the take the psychological ibuprofen on a daily basis to just keep the symptoms down, but never
Right.
actually deal with the issue. And so I saw that but what I saw in there was that, man, this really takes the body seriously, and connecting that with, for instance, what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6 is, you know, he who commits sexual sin sins against his own body.
Right.
And he said, okay, we're not disembodied creatures. Uh, we're not disembodied thoughts. All these things are connected with one another. So we get trained. And so for me, it was, as you mentioned, it was, okay, these guys have gone way too far over here with traumas, everything. And it should define everything about me. And then over here, I saw just so many so-called biblical counselors saying, you know, this is really simple.
Right.
Um, and it's like, well, it's really not. It's in because there are complex issues that are involved, and the you don't want to use the body keeps the score, but the body does is trained. Your mind is trained, and your heart is trained. Your emotions are trained. All those
Right.
things. And how do we then deal with that? How do we deal with it biblically? Because I do believe the scriptures are sufficient to help us work through any kind of, even if it's an actual trauma, you know.
Right.
Uh, you know, I told you before we got on the air that about my incident. My knee was actually traumatized. Okay,
Right.
I tore quadricep tendons and had to have surgery and everything like that, and it was the most excruciating pain I've ever had in my life. You know, that it was bad. And I experienced it at 56. You know, and so the pain is commensurate with my age, and so you know, it's really really bad. But a 3-year old who scrapes his knee, he falls down, hits hard, he's feeling pain too now, and we tell him, you know, it's not really not that serious, but he's still feeling those things, and we have to help him work through the feelings. But we wouldn't consider that a trauma. But you
Right.
still got the same pain. You got, you know, this painful experience that you do have to work through, and you have to figure out how to deal with that in the future. Now I use the knee, for instance, but when we're talking about an attack on the psyche, an attack on the soul, which is what some of these words and actions can do. Um, it's like how do you heal from that? How do you go through? And I think this in the old in the standard kind of reformed uh, talk is kind of what does sanctification look like for this person who's experienced these incidents, these sins against them? What does healing look like? What does it look like to come back after your mind and your body have been trained to think of God, others, and the world around you in a distorted fashion?
Right.
And so all of those things have come together, and having had to deal with people who have actually experienced real trauma, not just I got my feelings hurt because somebody disagreed with me. Um, the snowflake trauma.
Right.
um, People who have actually been sexually abused, physically abused, um, and abandoned, and things like that. It's like, okay, how do you deal with those? How do you appropriate God's truth in their lives when they've been trained to think of their relationships in terms of how they were taught from an early age? And
Right.
that's the other thing. And I know I'm going on here, but that's the other age, or the other issue is that we are in our most formative years is where we're most moldable, of course. And those are, the 0 to 5, 0 to 10 years of age where
Right.
we're learning language,
Hmm.
not just whether we speak English or Spanish or Italian or whatever, but we're learning how to relate to people, the way our parents relate to us, the way our extended family relates to us, the way we're treated, and of course also the way we treat others. But when we're in the formative years, most of the action is toward us.
Right. And you talk in
And
your essay a little bit about, you call it muscle memory. We
yeah,
learn muscle memory, but we also learn emotional muscle memory in a sense by the way we're raised and the way people treat us.
yeah, and that's the thing. And I know, again, there's some pushback against books like, oh, I just lost the title, but oh, Wired for Intimacy, how pornography rewires the brain.
Mm.
And I've used that book in the past and used it with some caveats. He's a like a human biologist or something like
Mhm.
that. And he talks about how neural pathways are changed when you use pornography. And I've told people for years. I grew up in the country, and I was a country boy and drove on dirt roads. And when it would rain in South Louisiana, those dirt roads, gravel roads, you start cutting ruts in those roads with your vehicle, and then everybody just starts driving in the ruts until a grader comes along and smooths everything out. But you have these ruts, and I've told people in counseling, I said, your brain or your mind, your heart gets like this. You cut ruts, habits, um, dopamine hits, and things like that. You get used to it. You get used to acting like this. And this is not to say that you can't be rewired. I said, but you got to cut new ruts.
Right.
You have to, but getting out of the old ruts is very difficult. If you've ever driven in ruts on a dirt road, you understand you have to jerk the wheel, get out of there, and start cutting new ruts. And I think we're like that. That's kind of the muscle memory, emotional muscle memory. If I have been yelled at and screamed at, let's just not go for the other types of abuse. But if I've just been yelled at and screamed at, and that's how I've learned to communicate. And I deal with this in premarital counseling. How do your parents deal with conflict? And if because each person's going to bring into that marriage the way they have learned to communicate, and it's going to be almost second nature to them. It's just like a fish swimming in water. This is what they've learned. This is what they know. And so they come in and they don't think anything's wrong with it. If something goes wrong, you just start yelling and screaming, throwing plates,
Hmm.
whatever, because this is how you handle conflict. This is how you learn it. Well, they have to relearn things, of course. And so it's not, but it has to be recognized that they have that emotional and communicative muscle memory. This is the
Right.
way, this is normal for them. And so somebody who's experienced being yelled at and berated, every person he meets, he's going to try to either, it usually goes to one of two ways. Either he's going to just completely act like he rejects everybody, or he's going to try to please everybody. He's going to be the hard rebel, or he's going to always be the doormat that everybody want to please. And so he's got to relearn how to relate to other people by the renewing of his
Right.
mind. So that's what I'm talking about. And that happens a lot in those young years when you're just learning how to be human,
Right.
how to mature. So,
Go back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier and connect this to it. Why do you think there's resistance to that kind of talk in reform circles? Uh, Understandably, a lot of these books sort of come strongly from an evolutionary perspective,
yeah.
a materialistic mindset. But where do you think um, the resistance to that sort of idea is that our bodies do affect our souls and vice versa? Have you seen the conversation? You've been in ministry for several decades, right? Thirty,
Yeah. Yeah.
35 years.
35 years. Yeah.
Okay, so have you seen the conversation around biblical counseling shift in that time? And
Oh, yeah.
where's the resistance come from to the ideas that our bodies uh, affect our souls, and not just the other way around?
Well, that's a good, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, you've got whether it was a uh, distortion or it was accurate, the whole Jay Adams nouthetic counseling. Your problem is sin, and here's how you deal with that. And it's really kind of matter of fact. And it's not this is, at least this is the way um, it comes across to a lot of people. I'm not saying this is completely accurate in an academic dive into nouthetic counseling, but it comes across to people as you fix it and forget it, and it shouldn't really affect you anymore because this is the healing type thing. And I think here lately, with what I've seen, uh, because feelings have become everything, they've become the arbiter of all truth. I think there's a hard reaction against that. Um, and whether you're talking, and I think that's whether you're talking about biblical counseling or you're talking about, or even like masculine influencers with Jocko Willink, or even more crudely, David Goggins. I'm not going to quote what he says about your feelings, but it's all this. I know, just forget about your feelings. They don't mean anything. And it's like, well, I understand where you're coming from because these snowflakes, everything is about their feelings, and they are they're making excuses for their sin. I felt this way. This is my truth. That kind of thing. And it's easy for the pendulum to swing and say feelings are nothing, but emotions are God given, and we reflect as images of God. We reflect His own. And I know this is controversial itself in the reform world. We reflect His own emotions, where God grieves, where God is angry, where all these things. And so emotions are God given, and as John Frame points out in some of his works, emotions are part of our our will, and they are part of the process of our thinking and choosing. So it's not like we can just say, well, your feelings are nothing. Feelings always have to be tempered, and they always have to be bounded by truth, reality, and they always have to be anchored in reality. And but they are real. So, for
Right.
instance, God gives me feelings, and let's just use a tactile feeling. I put my hand on a stove, it's hot. My feelings tell me it's hot, and if I don't get my hand off, it's going to destroy my hand. So I take it off. Well, those feelings can also be uh, not so tactile, with my hand. My feelings mean something.
Right.
They're coming from somewhere. Um, they may not be grounded in reality, but they are coming from somewhere, and they're coming probably from some type of past experience where I'm making a connection between this person and this person. It may not be a legitimate connection, but I'm making a connection. I used your a kind of a lighthearted, not Peter Lightheart, but a lighthearted illustration with your brother hitting you in the back of the head. You
Mm.
grew up, and he comes by, and every time he passes you, he hits you in the back of the head, and so you come to expect it, and that's your body starts reacting every time he comes. You duck, or you say, I'm going to put up my defenses, I'm going to hit him back. You're expecting that. Well, you carry that to other relationships. Is this guy going to hit me in the back of the head, or whatever? And so uh and some guy says, why do some guy you meet 20 years down the road, he says, why do you think I'm gonna whack you in the back of the head? I've never whacked you in the back of the head. um but it's connected, and all of a sudden this guy has to make this connection. This guy's not my brother.
Mm.
He's not the guy who's doing this to me. This is kind of like dealing with PTSD, uh, guys who coming back from the combat. And if you've seen American Sniper, there's this incident when he comes home, and they're having this birthday party in the backyard,
Hmm.
and he's sitting there, and all of a sudden this dog starts playing with the children, but he takes it like, wait, I've seen this before. I've seen this in Iraq, and he goes and grabs that dog. He's about to kill it, and his wife stops him. He has to get that. This is not there.
Right.
It's kind of like also hearing, one of these guys hearing fireworks. It's like all of a sudden they start hearing these fireworks go off, and they're back in the combat arena, and they're under fire, and they have to, and so they have all these feelings when they hear these sounds, and they make these connections. And what has to happen is somebody has to help them, or they help themselves to realize this is not that. And so they have to
Right.
ground their feelings in reality. And the same is true with us in a lot of other areas of our lives where we've been mistreated, we've been sinned against, some a particular person has done something to us, a parent, an uncle, an aunt, or somebody, and we simply have to get our feelings grounded in reality. And that sounds easy, but again, your body has been trained
Right.
with this immediate fight or flight type reaction. And so it's a matter of continually appropriating the truth and reality to your situation. And there are ways, I suppose, to do that. But it takes it takes a while, and sometimes,
Yeah.
and it's not about all the time recalling memories and doing those types of things, um, because I don't think reliving the past all the time is the way to
Mhm.
go. It's about understanding who you are, where you are, what your situation is, and your true relationship with God, with others, and what it should be, and then living in the light of that truth that starts to bring that healing.
What do you think of using things like cognitive behavioral techniques, or even the neural retraining with eye movement things, as part of an overall package of restoration and recovery. Someone
Interesting.
finds something that says, "Well, this helps. It really does help me." I know it's not the goal. We're still trying to get to the goal, but in the meantime, my leg's not getting better. I have to do physical therapy for that. But an Advil really helps. Helps that
Exactly.
work. What do you think of that? Because I know that probably smacks of integrationism to a lot of sort of hardcore biblical counselors who don't want to bring in false worldviews. Um,
Yeah.
but if we recognize the brain affects the body affects the brain, what would you say about that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I think let me deal with the cognitive behavioral therapy first because I one of the things I think, and I might be at odds with some people in the biblical counseling world here, um, because I think that some of that is actually very good.
Hmm.
From what I've read, and I've got hopefully a book coming out pretty soon on the discipline
Okay.
in Proverbs. And one of the things that one of the ways that, for instance, if you've been through some type, I'm trying to remember which author I've read this in. It was like, and it's not a Christian author, Lukianoff or Haidt or somebody like that. I think it was one of theirs, like uh, the Coddling of the American Mind.
Hmm.
Those books that Haidt and Lukianoff wrote. One of they talked about cognitive behavioral therapy in there, not in any depth, but it was if a person has experienced, severe trauma, one of the things that you do to develop mental toughness and ability to deal with that in the future is that you have to put them through measured stress. And that's one of the things I think Proverbs teaches about
Hmm.
discipline is that you have to put yourself through discipline is self-discipline is putting yourself through some measured stress to get yourself stronger. We do this physically.
Hmm.
If you're a runner or you lift weights, one of the things that you're doing is that you're putting yourself um, through stress in order to be able to get stronger to handle certain things. And I think the mind is like that as well. That you do have to face stress in order to handle it and to become mentally tough to do it in the future. Because if you're just a big bag of mush and all of a sudden a real stressor comes in your life, you're not trained to handle that. And so, as far as cognitive behavioral therapy helps train the body in order to handle those types of stress and even develop mental toughness. And I'm not speaking about it, how it's great in every area that it ever covers, but just a general principle.
Right.
I think it's good. And I, like you said, I know people, well, that sounds integrationist and things like that. Well, no, they're borrowing from the Christian worldview that the
Hmm.
body actually means something
Right.
and that training the body is important for the mind and the heart. For instance, what does God say about the discipline of children? He says, uh, if if you spank your child, if you use the rod, the foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. So God is connecting the heart with the rear end, so to speak. He's okay. You use the rod on your child. And of course, rod and instruction in Proverbs go together. You use the rod on your child and it'll change his heart. And so it's not like, okay, what you need to do is sit him down and go through his catechism and just pump him with this information. That's what's really going to change his heart. He says, no, 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 no. The rod and reproof give wisdom. Uh, so it's both. We are, as you said, embodied creatures. And so that when you're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, when you're going through physical things in order to train your mind, uh, I since I haven't been able to lift since my accident, but that's one of the things in lifting. I know I don't run. I have a magnet for my truck that says zero point 0.0. Um, I do not run, but I do know this. Uh, when you think you can't do anymore, if you push yourself to do one more, especially if you have people there to help you, push yourself to do one more, push yourself to do one more, that kind of thing. You are training your body, but it's not just training your body. You're tricking you're in some ways you're kind of tricking your mind and you're training your mind. Oh, wait a minute, I can do that. I can do a lot more than I think I can do. And
Right.
so the body and the heart are not some they're not hermetically sealed apart from one another. So even though I would question some of the methods of some of these guys and Vander Kolk and the eye stimulation and things like that, I haven't dug too much into that, but it sounds a little kooky to me. But but there are things that can help, and that's that body soul connection that I think sometimes is neglected, and we become almost
Mhm.
Gnostic in particularly the Reformed world where we shouldn't be, where we're deny all that kind of stuff, um, and we need to be very careful of that. It's
Right.
not it's all the body or all the mind. Again, those evil twin sisters are always there, and we're always wanting to be going to an extreme on one side or the other.
Right.
And it is horribly, to say it horribly, it is an integration of
Right.
body and mind. Yeah, to say these things help train the mind. That's if you ever talk to special forces guys about their training, they'll tell you it's all a mind game.
Mhm.
The body can do more than you think you can do. So this is all a mind game, and they're trying to break your mind. So that body soul, body mind, body heart connection is very tight. Is very tight.
Right. Let's think about that in terms of the command to forgive others. And
Yeah.
it's a biblical command. We pray to God, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors.
Right.
Jesus says, if your brother comes to you 77 times, you forgive him every time. That seems like a very, um, you can't really divide the two, but that's a very spiritually oriented response. It's
Right.
oriented, it's motivated by the Holy Spirit. We can't do that apart from the Holy Spirit. We can't just forgive our brother, but we're commanded to do that, and forgiveness is to be instant and complete. At the same time, if we're in a relationship with someone, an abusive parent, an abusive spouse, traumatic relationship for a long time, how do we balance that? You have to forgive right
Yeah.
now, and things still don't feel right. I've got
Yeah.
a lot of baggage that's coming with me. How do you keep from becoming, I'm trying to remember what the word you used, kind of being captive to your trauma and your past? uh, how do you keep from becoming trapped there? How do you move on toward restoration, recognizing that it might take a while?
Good question, because that's what it can possibly take a while. Just forgiveness, and there's a book, somewhat academic, I read years ago, and I think it's called Embodying Forgiveness by Gregory Jones. I benefited greatly from the book. It's because he breaks down and he talks about a lot of the differences between forgiveness and restoration, forgiveness and reconciliation, and kind of this. I don't want to say spectrum, because it's not really, because I can forgive without being completely uh, for without everything going back to the way it was. Uh, I can release the person from uh, my vengeance, that I'm not going to take revenge. I'm not going to hold bitterness against this person. Now, this may be also a continual process. Sorry about that. That should be off. This could be a continual process again and again because it comes up. But let's just say, let's say, we'll talk about the feelings, but let's just talk about, this type of forgiveness and reconciliation. Let's just say a wife commits adultery and she's a serial adulterer and she's refusing to repent. And the husband is trying to reconcile. She refuses to reconcile. She refuses to repent. They wind up getting a divorce. Say they're members of the church. The wife's excommunicated. She goes off and she continues her lifestyle. The man remarries. Later on down the line, several years down the line, this woman comes back. She is broken. She realizes what she did was wrong and she repents of her sin. Can that former husband and wife be at peace? Or can these exes be at peace? Yes. Can they be reconciled? Yes. Is it going to look the same as it was before? Absolutely not, because they can't get remarried. And so the relationship is completely changed. That doesn't mean that they can't be at peace. Now, this is comes down to other things. We've been sinned against by somebody else, whether it is sexual abuse or somebody has stolen from us or whatever it is. We can forgive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that relationship is going to be close in the future.
Right.
That we're not gonna be hanging out with this guy if my CPA has been embezzling from me. I'm probably not going to hire him again as my
Right.
accountant or whatever. Um, and so my feelings can be at peace, but I can also, it takes a long time to restore trust. And it may never, that relationship may never ever be the same again. And that's okay as long as as long as there's not this animosity and this bitterness. And so working through that, forgiving somebody uh, is an essential part of healing. It's got to be done.
Right.
You cannot heal. You cannot heal without that. It is, I think that is, the scriptures lay that out very clearly. We're not going to be healed. We're not going to be restored if we don't forgive. However, going through reconciliation, depending on the nature of the sin. I mean, I think this is also and I may have mentioned it earlier, just this leveling out of sin
Mm,
is a
that's right.
problem. It is like, well, all sin's the same. And, where all sin's condemnable. And I agree with that. All before
Mhm.
God and his judgment court, all sin is condemnable, but not all sin has the same consequence. When
Right.
Jesus talks about the lust in the heart or having anger towards your brother, uh, that is definitely sin. It's condemnable before God. But that is not the same as me going out and committing adultery or me going ahead and murdering my brother. The consequences are very different for those things at in history. And
Right.
so before God's court, lust and anger, in as Jesus said, God condemns them both. But the consequences are very, very different. He doesn't say that somebody who has lust in his heart should be stoned to death, like in the
Right.
law. That you're to deal with that at a personal level. So the consequences are very different. So we can't just level out these sins and act as if,
Mm.
okay, if I forgive, that just it's the same. It's the same all the way across the board for every sin. We have to deal with things, and one of the issues with this is that people just don't like to think through this stuff. Everybody wants an easy answer.
Right.
Everybody wants to just, okay, let's just give me a simple answer, and I deal with this in counseling all the time, is that uh, people say, just give me a tool. Well, I gave you tools. It's just that you don't want to work with them. It takes time, it takes effort, and this is hard to work through your feelings about this person. And but you're gonna have to do it.
Right.
And this and the depending on what's happened, it's harder to work through.
Right.
So depending on the depth of the hurt, it's kind of like I think I said in the article, the difference between a paper cut and somebody cutting you with a samurai sword. There's
Right.
there's a huge difference between those two.
I've been studying the book of Job recently and reading through that, and it's always striking how when you read Job's friends, a lot of what they say you can pull straight from Proverbs or
Oh yeah,
Ecclesiastes. It's not that they're saying things that aren't true, they're saying things that aren't true for Job. And
right.
they want the easy answer. I've got my one size fits all response to every situation
Exactly.
that will fix everything. And biblical wisdom is doing what you're talking about, which is
Hmm.
thinking through these hard things. They're not simple, they're not easy, but that's how you
Right.
grow up into wisdom is by addressing these situations like that. So good stuff.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I'm going to wrap up here in just a few minutes, but first,
Yeah.
kind of along these same lines, you talked about how you've benefited from the body keeps the score, Wired for Intimacy. Obviously, there are a lot of bad things in those books, but there are also things you can benefit by. And I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer in that. There is no book you can read that you're not going to be able to learn something from.
Right.
Even if just by negative example, what not to do,
Right.
you can learn
Exactly.
from anybody. Um, how would you counsel pastors, Christians, anybody in general, to be able to read critically those sorts of books, so that you can say, okay, what is beneficial that these people have discovered? Uh, what's not? Do we need to toss to the
Wow.
side?
Yeah.
That might be too big of a question at the very end here.
Well,
To
that is a hard question. I mean, I think you have to read widely, and you always have to read with with biblical through biblical lenses with biblical principles. So, for instance, and I know people don't like to hear, like in Wired for Intimacy, that you get wired this way, because one of the things that implies, like in The Body Keeps the Score, is that I've lost my moral agency. And Wired for Intimacy doesn't do that. The guy's a Christian, and at the end he says you can be rewired. And what you're doing is wrong. And so you we never lose moral agency, because the scriptures talk about the fact that we're accountable for our sin. And God's not going to send us to hell if we have blue eyes. Okay, that's not something we can control. God's given us those. That is not part of our moral agency. But if we're angry with our brother, if we lust, if we kill, if we abuse, those types of things. So the choices that we do make, we are responsible for. So as I'm going through these books, that is like one principle, especially in counseling, that is extremely important. And I've seen sadly, I mean, because again, there are people who want to be very sympathetic with somebody who's gone through some extreme trauma in their lives, and having dealt with some of those folks, you want to be very sympathetic, because it's like this has affected them so deeply that it seems almost as if they didn't have a choice to do what they did, that kind of thing. But to tell them, no, you do have this choice, and you've got, no matter what you feel at the particular time, you have to do the right thing. You can't say, you can't, and I know I'm showing my age here, but you can't do like a riff off of old Flip Wilson, "The Devil Made Me Do It."
Hmm.
um, the trauma made me do it, or something like that. I have to resist my feelings all the time. And when they're not lining up with scripture. I can't say, well, I'm traumatized, so therefore I can do this without any kind of uh, moral judgment or God judging me about this. So as I'm reading these books, anything that takes any kind of moral agency away from me and says you're not responsible for your sin, it's your trauma, I have to reject that. But then I have to say, like this, are they teaching me something about habit building, like in Wired for Intimacy? Is this a part of the hardening that happens with sin that's practiced over time, leaven that's not cut off, and that overwhelms us, that we're constantly warned about in Scripture, that you can become hardened in sin, and you can go so far down the road that you can't see straight anymore. So is this related to that? That kind of that, the Wired for Intimacy. Can I train my body so much that I train my heart to be hardened toward what God says?
Hmm.
And then also, like, with the body keeps the score stuff, it's like there's a lot in there what he says that I don't agree with, but the general principle about our body kind of storing these things, and saying, you know what, this is I'm reacting here based on something that happened to me over here, and it's and then not using it as an excuse, but to say, how do I reconcile this? What does God say about this? Uh, how do I get reconnected to reality? And reality is God's truth and what He says about Himself, me, and the world around me. And so I got to get reconnected so I can take some of what they say and understand. Okay, well, they got some things, but you always have to read through biblical lenses because the Bible is truth.
Right.
And so that's how that and again, some of that comes just with maturity in age and reading widely, and also not doing this alone, talking with other men, wise men along the way. Say, hey, I've read this in this book. What do you think? You know, don't just sit in your office and try to do this by yourself or in your library. You have friends who are mature, older, not just peers, but older than you, who have been around the block. You can bounce this off of, who will not be afraid to say, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Don't ever read that book again."
Right.
so so you need all that. You need all that, but no problem reading these things and reading widely. Um, Being careful not to be sucked in. Always read good solid stuff along the way.
Right.
But you can chew the meat and spit out the bones, and sometimes there are lots of bones.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thanks for the conversation today, Bill. It's been enjoyable. I've been glad to talk to you and just have you flesh out your ideas a little bit more. I'm going to put
Yeah,
your link to your article in the comment section underneath so people can go
appreciate that.
read that. And also let me know when you get that book published that you're working on. Maybe we can have you back on to promote that as well.
Actually, it is at the publisher. I'm just
Oh,
waiting
so
for it to be
coming soon.
published. So it was already supposed to be out. So I don't know what's happening, but we'll see, and
Right.
I'll let you
Sounds
know.
good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, you have a good week and we'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thank you, Yenrik.